Hello and welcome to THSTOfficial, the podcast of the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust. Thanks for tuning in again. I'm Martin Buhagiar. Good evening, as always, to fellow THST board members Anthoulla, Achilleos, Rachel Martin and Rob White. Good evening, guys.
Good evening.
This evening, we're going to be discussing mental health awareness. Sorry, as my dogs continue to shake in the room. I think they're on every podcast, aren't they, these days? So that's that noise. We're going to be discussing mental health awareness. The world we currently live in, the pandemic, lockdown, had a huge impact on the mental health of most of us, I would imagine. And it's great that we're now talking more and more about this area. Like us, I'm sure people listening to this use football as a way of getting away from it all. And obviously lockdown has meant that we've been unable to enjoy that form of escapism. So that's the theme of this episode, mental health awareness. Quick disclaimer to say this will be a sensitive topic and we'll be talking quite openly about mental health during this pod or vlog. We will put some links at the end for anybody that needs any support, and we'll be offering advice. And on our website, we'll also have a list of organisations that can help you if you feel you'd like to speak to somebody. We've also got two very special guests joining us this evening. Welcome to Flav Bateman from the Fighting Cock podcast, a Spurs fan who I'm sure needs no introduction to most people listening to this podcast because he's very well known in this area of work. Good evening, and thanks for joining us, Flav.
Absolute pleasure to be here. I'm not a special guest at all, but thank you for saying that. That's really kind. Mental health has been something that has really sort of dictated my life to a certain degree. So I'm really happy to talk about it openly. I think that's really important that people do, not just men, but anybody, talk about their mental health in a very open and very vulnerable way. And I'm ready to do that if that's okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Flav. Very much so. Hello also to Tara Hancock. Now, Tara's also an inspirational Spurs fan who founded Sport Against Suicide in 2019 with the aim of teaching young people how to recognise and empower their own mental health and well-being. Hello, Tara, and thank you also for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me. Mental health's a massive thing to me. And it was finding Tottenham Hotspur, obviously, that helped me along the way, which obviously I will tell you about shortly.
Great, thank you. Thank you both for joining us. So Flav, we'll start with you. I'm sure many of our listeners, as we said, know you from your work with the Fighting Cock. But perhaps you want to just talk about who you are, how you got involved in that, but also the work that you've done with the Fighting Cock in raising awareness for mental health.
Who I am, I started a Spurs podcast 10 years ago, and do you know what? I started the podcast because I needed a distraction from my general life, like everything, and it wasn't difficult. It was good. It was lovely and wholesome, and I had a great relationship, and everything was fine. But I felt like I needed something outside of my everyday life, and the podcast just came to be, really, because talking about Spurs, Tottenham Hotspur try all of our mental health situations every week, and we find ourselves in a situation right now where it's tough being a Spurs fan. But what I found the best element of dealing with a bad result was just talking about the game with my mates, and the Fighting Cock was just about that, really. Let's replicate the conversations that we were having in the pubs, put it on record, and then put it out and see what happens. And it's done really well, and really grateful for it, and really humbled by it all, and it's it's been a wonderful thing, really. In terms of mental health, when we started the podcast, like I say, 10 years ago, I was involved in a project with a charity that I used to work for called Exposure. And I stumbled across an email that was sent to me by a charity called CALM, so Campaign Against Living Miserably. And this was a charity that aimed to reduce male suicide, because at the time, and probably still is to this day, that 3 in 4 suicides were men. And it was thought at the time that it was because men didn't feel able to talk about their emotions or feel comfortable being vulnerable. And it resonated. So, you know, I kind of got, like, it made sense, but also was shocking at the same time. So I started doing projects with Calm, working with them, and then we produced a podcast. Podcast became relatively successful, and we thought, why not bridge the gap between the two? And, you know, the target demographic of the Fighting Cock, and every podcast, every bit of content that's created about Tottenham is aimed at the demographic of people that, or specifically men who feel like, you know, life's tough. And so we thought, why not marry the two? And that's what we did. And I feel like we did a lot of good work in the early days. This is before Calm exploded. Like, Calm now is magnificent, and it's huge, and it resonates throughout the UK. And we've sort of, obviously the podcast has sort of becomes irrelevant in what they are trying to achieve. So that's, I think, I don't know if I've bumbled my way through that, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
No,
it's great, Flav. Honestly, thank you so much for telling us that, and being so open about it as well. So, Tara, I think your camera still on. So I've got off my screen.
I'm back. Sorry about
There
that.
we go. Sorry. So we've also got Tara with us. So I got into contact with Tara through a lovely guy at the Hull Supporters Trust, because we were looking to do a bit more around mental health awareness. And he thought, oh, you know, you should speak to Tara. She's got a fantastic story about Spurs. And honestly, when Tara told me this on the phone, literally, it was so inspiring, and it actually brought back a bit of love for Tottenham, because I was losing that through this lockdown, and it sparked that back up. So I'm hoping, if anyone's listening and they have kind of fallen out of love with the club, that Tara will be able to inspire you as well. So Tara, would you like to tell our listeners about it?
Oh goodness, right. We certainly, I wouldn't say everybody's fallen out of love. I hope you haven't fallen out of love. I know you've all been fans a lot longer than I have, and certainly the last couple of years I've kind of definitely given you all my sympathies of what you've been through for such a long time. But as they say, you know, you're Tottenham till you die, as they say, don't they? Well, for me, it was, 2018 was when I first found football, let alone Spurs, to be fair. It was throughout my life, on and off, I've suffered with depression and anxiety a couple of times throughout my life. By the June of 2018, I would say my mental health had deteriorated quite seriously at that point, to the point where I started to have suicide ideation, which is suicidal thoughts. And the story of how I found Spurs and how my mental health and how I kind of jokingly but seriously say football saved my life. It began on the day that Spurs were on their way up to Newcastle to play them up there at an away game. And basically from the June through to the beginning of August, I think it was August the 2nd, if I believe I've got my dates right, was the day that was the defining moment. So I've been having these thoughts coming and going. For those who know anything about suicidal thoughts, there's no definitive how you're going to have them for anybody. They're all specific to you and what happens, you know, with your own experience. My experience was that they were coming and going. Mainly I was getting them quite strong in the mornings and certainly in the evenings. Whether that's because I was more alone with my thoughts at those points, that is where it seemed to be happening for me. So this continued right up to this particular day when a friend of mine who is a Spurs fan was going off to the away game, and we'd been on the telephone call, and as with everything, you know, putting on the brave face, I'm acting completely normal, like there's nothing going wrong, nothing's going on in my head, I'm absolutely fine. We had a bit of banter about this particular game. As you can probably tell, there's a bit of a Geordie accent here. So it was quite a funny one that they were playing Newcastle. I basically said at that particular moment, oh, there's no way Spurs are going to beat Newcastle. And I, at that point, was still thinking that Kevin Keegan was playing for Newcastle upon Tyne. So that just shows you, doesn't it? He was playing for Newcastle. And we had this banter. So it's right, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll put a little bit of a bet on it. Now, I'm not advocating that you go out and gambling, because this is not, that won't help you get over your mental health, but mental illnesses. But we went off. I decided I was going to put £5 on Newcastle to beat Spurs that day. But being me, I also decided to put £5 on Spurs to beat Newcastle, because I wanted to come out with something, just so I could rub it in a little bit. So off I went, put my bet on, and then I needed somewhere to watch this game. So I went and found a local public house where big screens, as you have. And I sat there watching the game, literally thinking, I have not got a clue what's going on this game as such. I could see people running from one end of the field to the other and so on. Anyway, get to the end of that game, Spurs won. So I was quite happy. I thought, well, I've won something out of this. Plus I can rub it in a little bit, that I've got a bit of money too, that I had hedged my bets. And anyway, what happened after that particular game was, something said to me, I'm going to keep an eye on this team called Spurs. I'm going to watch them again. Something drew me in a little bit, whether it was because in that moment it took me out of that dark place I was in. It gave me something to focus on, something to find some interest in again. So I continued to watch them over the following weeks. Spurs at that time actually seemed to have a trot of good luck, because they were winning a few games after that. I think it was right up until the Liverpool game where they were beaten, and that was disappointing. But by that point, I was well and truly hooked. And I did actually think, hang on, I think I'm going to become a fan of this team. So I continued to watch them. Now, what I would say here is, by no means did Spurs wave a magic wand and take away my problems, or take away the fact that I had been in that very dark place. I did have to reach out, and I did have to get help, and I did have to start looking after my own mental well-being. But they gave me something, they gave me hope, I suppose is what I'm going to say. No more feeling that I had nothing to be to look forward to in my life. I look forward to watching their games every week and getting to know people, because it soon grew. I started to get to know other fans right up until February the 2nd. I was travelling down to Wembley to watch my very first Tottenham Hotspur game, and of course it had to be the Newcastle v Tottenham game. For me, it was a no-brainer. And I met a lady on a platform in Coventry who was also a Tottenham Hotspur fan. And the reason I knew was this, because she had a big bobble hat on with Tottenham written right across the top. So I walked up and said, well, I think you're going where I'm going. And she was like, yeah. I said, well, do you mind if I join you? So we made friends. She introduced me to a load more fans. And literally the rest is history. I became a huge fan. In the April of 2019 was when I decided I wanted to do something with my experience, and I became a mental health advocate, and then I set up Sport Against Suicide. I wanted to give back to football, because for me football was what took me out of that space, but my message had to be for young people, because I believe we target them to change the statistics going forward. So it was a no-brainer. Go into the football academies and start to teach them about mental health and suicide prevention. So there you go. Sorry for that, very long-winded, but that's how I went from there to here.
No, not at all. I mean, that's so interesting and inspiring, and thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, can you just tell us a little bit more before we move on about what that actually means? What is this organisation, and what is the work it does?
Right. Well, Sport Against Suicide, as you know, obviously it's set up because of my own experience, as lived experience. I have done lots of training as well. I was always very much into mental health awareness before, because of my own mental health and mental health problems. But I obviously decided I need to up that and get a lot more sort of education under my belt, so to speak. So once I've been doing that, and I still continue to do that now all the way through, I decided what I wanted to do was to go into the football academies. Now, that's not just the elite football academies, that's the football education programs. It's also community football, so from grassroots upwards as well. So basically, I will work at delivering those messages to any young person within football, from the grassroots level right up to the elite academies that are there now. I also, alongside that, support the coaches and staff. So it's not just the youngsters, it's anyone who works within that environment. So if any of them are having, problems with their mental health, or maybe struggling a little, or just want someone that they can reach out and talk to get some advice, they can come via SAS. And basically that's what I do. So I do workshops, delivering mental health awareness sessions and suicide prevention. And basically covering all those topics, right through from empowering them to look after their well-being, and that includes the staff. So as in the lockdown, as obviously a lot of the staff weren't able to go into the clubs and work from there, some of them were struggling a little bit, trying to get through each day because they were used to having such a structure. So I delivered workshops on how to look after their well-being during the lockdown and during the COVID situation, because a lot of people were quite anxious. There was a lot of anxiety.
I'm sure. Thank you. And I'm sure that during this podcast, we're going to talk about some of the strategies that that we use and that we can recommend. I mean, I'm going to come on to Flav in just a moment, but I just wanted just to sort of, if we could have a little think about what lockdown has been like for us and for our supporters, because I think it's a mixed bag, because some people have said that actually, they've really quite enjoyed it. I mean, obviously there's the stress that everyone is under, and especially at the beginning when we didn't know how the virus worked, we didn't know if we were being led well, we didn't know if the advice, and indeed not just the advice we weren't being given and the advice we were being given, it was all taking its toll. There was the isolation. People who live on their own, that's a very different thing if you're working from home, to people who live with their family and are grateful that they're not having to commute and that they can spend more time. But they're also trying to educate their children while working. There's a whole load of pressure. And then the move to online and all of this, the Zoom, which sort of feels like contact, except it isn't contact, as we know. And again, some people haven't touched another human being for a long time. So it's really difficult. And then, of course, as we all have football in common, and that the match day routine, and Flav, you sort of touched on this in your introduction about what that means and what it means to not have it, especially, I think, when the team are not really cutting it. Can you tell us, Flav, a bit about what it's like for you? And
Easily. And when you was talking there, I was getting a little bit emotional, because I was thinking about, the lockdown hasn't been unkind to me. I live in the middle of nowhere in Wiltshire, and it's suited to, being isolated. That's something I've always sought, and that's where I've ended up. But because of lockdown, I haven't seen I've got 5 brothers. I haven't seen them. My old man, who I saw when the restrictions were lifted, I went down to see him in London, and it was wonderful. It was lovely, and just be able to just see him again, and the link between us all, apart from being family, is Tottenham. And if Spurs aren't playing at home and football isn't on, then there isn't the obvious reason for us to get together and watch Spurs and just be together. And Tottenham is, it's intrinsic. It's a massive part of our relationship with each other and our lives. But if you go to a match day, you realise very quickly, especially if part of your match day experience is the ritual of meeting your friends or your family in the pubs, the actual game isn't as significant as it is being together. And you know, whatever Spurs may do on that game, on that day, whether it's, throwing away a lead to Newcastle as we did earlier on in the season, or throwing away three goals to West Ham, it matters, but it doesn't matter as much if you're together in Tottenham. And it's been tough. It's been really, really, really tough. It's been, honestly, it's been horrible, because we rely on our football club to bring us together often, and if it's quite difficult to bring everyone together if your football club isn't there. So yes, it's not been great, but I'm sure there are other people out there. Like without a shadow of a doubt, there are other people out there that have had a lockdown that's much more difficult than mine. But in terms of my life and what I do and how I integrate with my family and my brothers and my mates, football and Tottenham are a massive part of that. So yeah, I'm looking forward for it to come back and not have to deal with that bullshit, to be fair.
I think it's quite interesting what you say, Flav, because obviously when we came back to the stadium after being at Wembley, the second season at Wembley, I actually found myself going to less games because we could just get the money back on the season ticket, and I went to see Haringey Borough quite a lot. But then when we went back to the stadium, what I thought was absolutely astounding was, and I actually said this to Donna Cullen last year, actually, at one of the Rainbow Laces events, and I said, I don't know, I think Spurs did it, they've stumbled upon something by happy accident, because that new stadium, getting fans there before a game and after a game, you just have conversations, and I know, same as you, Flav, I have conversations with people that I don't know very well. The only thing I know about them is that they support Spurs.
Yep.
But it's actually it's a place where people, there's this common trust, really. And I have the weirdest conversations about divorce, separations, people that have got money issues, people that are, down, people that, and all of those things happen at a football game. And a bit like you were saying, Rachel, it's sort of disturbing to think what has been filling that void, because the experience isn't the same. And I think it's a generalization, but for men, I know this conversation isn't just about men, but I think because we don't talk about things, we don't open up. But at a football ground, you will talk about stuff. And there's people, I just know their first name, but they've told me the most extraordinary things at a football ground or at a pub afterwards, but usually at a football ground. Anyway,
can I just add to that, Rob? So when we were doing that work with Calm, we had a group of lads that were that would follow the podcast, and we had at the time this idea of what we called back then as the 1882 movement, which was just getting together like-minded fans that would go and watch Tottenham, whatever level. It might be under 16s, it might be the development squad, it might be Premier League Division 2 or some sort of strange European competition where our young players were playing. We watched Harry Winks actually play at White Hart Lane against Barcelona in the next gen competition. And it was at these games where there was maybe 400, 500 Spurs fans. And because we were talking openly on the podcast about mental health, and we were saying, I'm struggling. I've suffered. There was this time where this was happening to me and I didn't understand it and I didn't want to talk about it. And because of that kind of openness, we were getting people at these games, really opening up to me. And I found it really difficult, to be honest. There's one thing talking into a microphone as I'm doing now, which I feel quite comfortable doing. And there's another thing where you've got this lad who's 20 years old and he's saying, I listened to what you were saying on the podcast and it was really moving, and I related to it, and then went on to talk about how difficult he was finding things. And it was humbling, but it was also a lot to listen to when you're just putting a podcast out about Tottenham. Do you know what I mean? So it was Yeah, it's Spurs. Yeah, Spurs. You know, it creates more football, more over than Tottenham. Creates conversations where if people are being vulnerable and open, the others feel able to be open and vulnerable as well.
Can I just say that, Flav, what you've described there just shows that you could have made, or you probably did make, such a massive impact on like so many people's lives just with those podcasts. It's something so small, and that, I think that's the whole point. Well, for me anyway, the whole point of this podcast and the whole point of trying to do more around mental health awareness is that we can do stuff in the community to help people, but before it gets to a point where they need more than that, where those services aren't quite there yet. And what you did do through that podcast is absolutely incredible. And obviously it was probably quite overwhelming for you because, you know, you've never been in that situation before where people are coming up to you, opening up to you, and you're not quite sure what to do about it. But at the end of the day, they were able to do that, and just by opening up, that could have really like changed their lives, and that's absolutely amazing. Bye.
Yeah, I mean that's lovely to hear. But yeah.
Oh, bless you.
There is actually quite a lot to be said for social psychology. You know, and the kind of togetherness is one of the biggest things in terms of promoting good mental well-being and to avoid it going down that more serious route of suicide, you know, suicide prevention, is promoting togetherness. And I do genuinely, obviously I'm living proof of that. You know, football brings people together. So being able to, like Rob said, you know, meeting up at the game and talking to people, and it's the one place where people feel it's okay to open and talk to each other about whatever problems they've got, is the beauty of it all. And yeah, I've had conversations with people myself, you know, about, you know, my own story and obviously about friends that I've made, and it's really is an important part of our mental well-being is togetherness. So it's been really hard for people within the lockdown, like you say, because that's been taken away from everybody. I mean, I can remember just hearing the chants, you know, the chant, it used to light me up inside. It was like, oh my God, you know, I used to love hearing it. So when we would watch it on Sky, I knew which channel I was choosing. I wanted to hear the crowd noise. Although I swear they still use the Tottenham Hotspur on every single game, no matter what team's playing. It sounds like it does. So, yeah.
It's always the Dele Alli song. That's all I ever seem to hear. Why is no playing? I just constantly hear, particularly in Europe, it was just the Dele Alli song constantly.
Yeah.
I love. That's the only song my teenage boys want to sing constantly. So it's always good to hear that.
Would you mind if I just like I did a podcast during lockdown. I've had many conversations with lots of people about various different things, and I spoke to a lady called Abby. I can't remember her surname. I don't think she ever gave it to me because she was talking about her struggles with anorexia. She's now 29 and she's recovered in as much as she would define recovered as different as I would. So she's recovered to the point where she's been able to live a normal life. Actually, she's doing really well. She's actually working for Sky Sports at the moment, so she's doing fantastically. But she, when she was from 9 years old to about 16, she was in a bad way. And I don't know how much. I don't know a great deal about anorexia. I know probably more than someone who hadn't spoken to Abby. But she was in a situation that was so bad that at 15 years old, it was at a point where she was potentially going to lose her life because of this illness. And her uncle, who she was really close to, was a fan of Swansea. And her uncle came to her. She got a day release from the hospital she was being treated at, and her uncle said, "Let's go and watch Swansea City tonight. Let's just forget about all of the staff, let's go and watch Swansea. And she said, yeah, all right. And before that point, she was not really interested in football, but she was like, she wanted to, in her own words, said, I want to say goodbye to my uncle because he's really close to me. And she'd already committed to the fact that she was going to, you know, it was the end of the road for her. And she went to Swansea City, and I think they lost 5-2. But for those 90 minutes, she lost all of her illness. She lost every part of anorexia, which is not about, it's not about an eating disorder. It's a mental health issue where she is combating something or a part of herself that is self-sabotaging. And anyway, for that 90 minutes when she was watching Swansea City, she lost that part of it. And she's at pains to say that football didn't save me. That night didn't save me. There was a long road ahead. But having an opportunity to escape from what she was dealing with for 24 hours a day, to just go to the football and have a separation from that was what gave her that moment of thinking, actually, I can get out of this. And it kind of felt like when we were talking and listening to you guys talk, it felt like it fit with that conversation I'd had with Abby a few months ago.
Absolutely.
Very similar to me, my story. For that 90 minutes, I was no longer that person who was depressed. I was no longer that person who felt like I felt worthless, was where I was at in my head. The hopelessness was completely there. But for those 90 minutes of that very first game, even though I was watching it on a TV screen, I was no longer that person. I was Tara watching a football match.
Yeah.
And then the games after that, you know, I'm no longer Tara who's had a mental health problem or who's had suicide ideation. I'm now Tara the football fan. I'm now Tara the Spurs fan. And with each week or day that passes and you're working on yourself, you become, you know, I'm Tara. I'm not that. I'm not defined by an illness, or I'm not defined by the space I was in at that time. And that would have been the same for her.
Yeah.
It's great to hear that someone else was there.
It's amazing the impact sport can have, because even one of the things I also manage my son's under 18s football team. I've done it since they were under 8, so it's a really weird experience teaching these kids who all think they're going to be professional footballers and listen to every word you say, and then they overtake you in size and height and they don't want to listen to you anymore, but they're lovely lads. And we had a lad a few years ago who had a really hard upbringing. I won't go into details, but he lived with his grandparents, and his escapism was playing football, and it was lovely to see him on the football pitch because he played in a different way to his demeanour away from the game. He was a completely different lad, and he was free from everything. And it's interesting because I saw him a few weeks ago, actually. I mean, he left us and joined another team, but he's a completely different lad now. He's gained his confidence, and he was saying, football gave me that confidence. Football gave me that. That's when I escaped and I learned to channel my feelings into the football. Then I learned, actually, if I can do that during a football match, I can do that in life. And then I found music and I found other things to focus my mind on. And now he's doing really well. And likewise, we had our first football game on a Saturday a few weeks ago, and it was great to get the lads back together. And their parents are all saying the same thing. We were worried about just their mental health, the kids who want to play football all the time. And it's incredible the impact that sport can have, isn't it? It just has a hugely positive impact, which is lovely. And one thing, it's probably worth us doing now is just we're all going to talk about different elements of what mental health means to us. And and I've already checked with my old man, because he suffered from depression. He's a Spurs fan, the reason I support Spurs, and he had when he retired, I think he found it quite hard. Just retiring, because he was a very creative man, and then he suddenly stopped, and he found that difficult. He struggled with diabetes, and his left leg caused him loads of problems, and he had really bad depression for a few years. And then just before lockdown, so February last year, had his leg amputated, and so we were all really concerned about, thinking, my God, how's that going to impact him? He was suffering from depression, it's a huge thing to go through. And then obviously I couldn't see him for huge chunks, and he couldn't have physiotherapy. It was really difficult. But he came out the other end, because he suddenly filled himself, when he got his prosthetic leg, with positive thoughts, because the pain was gone, and he found himself being more mobile with his prosthetic leg. So it's more of a happy story. But I saw him for almost a decade suffering with depression because of this injury, and just when we thought it was probably going to be the worst part of that with the amputation, it completely changed everything. So it's like a real, I don't know, it's from our point of view, is watching the change in him and seeing him progress with his new limb, if you like, and the kickstart that gave him in his life was incredible. But it also taught me, I think, to deal with depression, because until that point I'd never really thought about it, because you don't, do you? You kind of carry on. But it sort of seeing him in the way he was and realizing it is an illness that needs professional help, because it's what we've all said, isn't it? A lot of people just deal with it themselves, but they have to go and speak to somebody, because it's like any other illness. If you don't get professional help.
I'm listening to you talk there, and that sounds like massively traumatic. That sounds like more than what most families go through in a typical 12 months. And what you did is, from my perspective, is you skirted over a lot of it, and I don't think you I don't think we could ever appreciate just how difficult all that was for you. And when you're talking about your own, I think this is like a part of a British culture, is that we kind of skirt over the proper difficult bits of the last 12 months, and we're just saying, yeah, well, he was, he had a tough 10 years, which is meant like that's tough in itself, and then he had his leg amputated, and he's got diabetes, and then he found an ability to be philosophical about it. But actually, what you went through, and what all of what you just told me was just like a nick on the surface of what it actually must have been like to go through.
Oh yeah, the years before. So when he actually went in to have a stent, and the hospital got it horribly wrong, they couldn't fight it. So we were taking him backwards to Bedford Hospital and back. Probably shouldn't name the hospital, because they did get it wrong. But there we go. We've name dropped him anyway. But that was a really hard time, because that was like sort of 3 years of really difficult living for my mum. They're both retired in a bungalow on their own, and my dad was in a really bad place, and my mum was as well, because she was having to deal with it on a daily basis. And so her escapism was her children, her grandchildren. But at that point, we didn't really want to, going over there was more difficult, because it depended what kind of mood Dad was in. So absolutely, the years before were hard. And I remember telling those guys on the Supporters Trust, in sort of February, just Dad's having his leg chopped off. But because my dad's that kind of guy as well, even through his depression, he's a very much a joker. So when they were actually talking to him in hospital, he's just hitting them back with these ludicrous gags, like, oh, that's going to leave me stumped, and I'll toe the line, and all these not just absolute non. And you're like, Dad, are you taking this in? Because that's our worry. We're like saying, you actually listening to what's going to happen. But it was the other side of it. The last year has been really good. He's really turned the corner. But yeah, absolutely, Flav. And it is true, actually, when you're talking about mental health, we probably don't go into the harder parts, do we? We do skirt over it, as I did, because it's the decade before was difficult. It has been difficult to get to this point. Absolutely.
We definitely, as a British nation, we definitely downplay things. We don't want to be seen to be moaning, as individual. That's why probably it's been inbred into us, sort of, let's just downplay it. I don't want anyone to think and have a fuss or think there's anything seriously wrong here, but you don't know what's going on the inside. And it's funny you're talking about your dad, laughing and doing this, that, and the other. And that's the thing with mental illness and depression. You can still function on a daily basis with depression. It's not as some people who would think that, you're going to sit in a corner and you're going to be crying all the time and low all the time. Depression isn't like that all the time. Sometimes you can function with it on a daily basis, depending on how severe you have it. And some days can be worse than others. And that's like with mental health. it's not stagnant. Our mental health flows all the time, from the minute you get up to the minute you go to bed. And it's when it's suddenly kind of, you know, someone's put the brakes on and you can't go, you know, continue to flow, is when you're looking at having that problem.
No, absolutely.
I think for me, so for those that don't know, I work for the NHS, so I work in a hospital, and mental health is part of my, you know, assessment with patients, and what I'm hoping in years to come, people will realise that your mental health is attached to your physical health. You are one, like mind and body are one. So when one is not working, the other will be affected too. And I think it's taken us a long time to even get to that stage because of the stigma around, you know, mental health. People think, oh, physical illness, I'll just go get that fixed, you can see it. Whereas with a mental health illness, it's not a quick fix like that, and people can't see it. And people think, you know, there's something wrong with me, I'm not going to talk about it. But actually, it just as you would go and put your arm in a cast if it was broken, it's the same with mental health. You would go and get therapy and treatment for that to help, you know, get some coping mechanism in place. It's not something that's just going to go away, but it's something that can be managed, and it is okay to feel like that. And, you know, the phrase that everyone hears, and I think it's such an important phrase, is that it is okay to not be okay, and it is normal, and to normalize that, I think, is just so important. So yeah, I think it's just something that's been with me for a really long time, and I've had like a very personal experience with a family member last year that really like drummed it even more home. And it's very different, you know, talking to a patient that's telling you things compared to a family member that's telling you something you're a bit more attached, and it is harder. And yeah, for me, mental health is just something very close to my heart, and I really want there to be like a change in society where, because the mental health services they're still playing catch up. We don't have those services like we do for physical health. There's not enough funding, there's not enough qualified staff to be giving out CBT, cognitive behavioural therapies. It's not there. So when it gets to that stage, people are left pretty hopeless, and it's pretty hard for them to get help. But if you can be tackled before it gets to that stage, then, and that's where the community comes into play. That's where togetherness comes into play. So yeah.
As we're all being so open, I've never told this story before. It's not a story, it's something that happened. And I've never talked about it on the Fighting Cock or elsewhere. But when I was in my early 20s, I had like a bit, I wouldn't say a breakdown. It wasn't that extreme, or maybe it was. Maybe I'm underplaying it. I don't know. But I was struggling, and I was having panic attacks and that kind of stuff. And I went to Spurs, which was always my kind of like safe haven, isn't it? It's like, it's where we go to watch football, and it's the football club we love, Tottenham Hotspur. Come on, what's your name on a Saturday afternoon? It's the bollocks. And I remember being in a pub after the game with my brothers and my dad, which is also my safe place as well. Like, if I can't feel more comfortable around anybody apart from my missus now, but she wasn't around then. Like my brothers and my dad, and I was in a pub. It was the old Latino bar next to the Blue Bar, Tottenham High Road.
Yep.
Yeah, do you know, it's like near the football stadium, just over. It's closed down now, but I was in there, and I was holding my pint and having like a full-blown panic attack. And I couldn't tell my dad, and I couldn't tell my brothers, because I thought, what would they think of me? Why am I panicking? Why am I suffering? Or why am I scared of being just in this moment? And I just left. I just said to my dad and my brothers, I've got to go. I've got to go. Like, my missus at the time is calling me, or whatever it might have been. And I just had to leave. And it was at that moment where I felt the lowest, I think, in my 20s, where that, you know, being at Tottenham, being with my brothers, being with my dad, even at that point, I felt scared and afraid over nothing. Like, I mean, it's not nothing, but if anybody's had anxiety, you know that it feels like there's nothing to be afraid of. Why am I scared? Why am I having these feelings? why am I looking around me and there's nothing there that would cause panic? But inside me, I'm going through a massive episode. And it's just luckily through just accepting it and talking about it, that I never had to experience that again. But just, Tottenham and football is really important, but even in that moment, that wasn't enough. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I don't know why I felt to share that there.
Thank you for sharing.
Thanks for sharing.
And that's what it's about, creating safe spaces where people can talk about things, and it actually makes people feel better about it as well when they talk about things. But also remembering that some people might not want to talk about things, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to then at all.
Yeah, but we can't lose the fact that people still want their privacy, and I think because there's such an emphasis on a mental health campaign now, which is it's okay to talk, which is great. It's about encouraging people to talk. Is we don't want people to feel forced into talking, but the important bit is that they understand that there are confidential helplines and people to go to still get the help from. They don't have to talk to the neighbour or their friend about their problems. They can still have their privacy, but to go and speak to a professional and get that support. Don't go through it on your own.
I agree, absolutely. And it is really, like you said, just having just knowing that there is that there and that safe space there for you to talk about might just be enough for people. They may not want to talk about it, but knowing that there is that, it helps. Yeah. And so, yes, it is important to talk about things and open up, but it is also okay if you're not ready to. That's absolutely fine too.
Yeah.
And I think there are some things that that work for some people, don't work for others. But for example, mindfulness and just sort of really noticing how you are feeling in different situations and being kind to yourself and non-judgmental. And for example, lockdown coincided with me retiring, so I suddenly had all this time which I didn't expect I was going to have. I thought I would be doing consultancy, and I didn't. But I've done loads and loads and loads of walking. So every day I go out for a long walk, and I notice nature and I notice things, and it's my way of getting to be with friends as well. So I always walk with someone. We have water nearby. I find that when I'm by water, that makes me feel better. When I notice the blossom coming out on the trees and the magnolia and all of these things. But I think one of the real important lessons is to be kind to yourself. And so for example, people sometimes they sort of you use the word, Flav, self-sabotaging. And so for example, I hadn't seen my granddaughter for 3.5 months, and I was meant to be going to see her last Monday with my daughter. And I knew that I had to leave at I had to get up at 6:15 to get to leave at 7:30 to go and everything. And I'd got myself worked up into this state. And it ended up, I went to bed, I set my alarm. Right, can I do this with 4 hours sleep? I've got to drive all the way around the M25, 3 hours, 2 hours. In the end, it was 5:45 and I was still awake. And I'd completely self-sabotaged. And I had to send a message to my daughter, knowing that this comes over as this flaky mother and nana, and saying I can't come. And I was heartbroken, but I just had to forgive myself. And I did it. I did it this last Monday. I've seen her, and life is wonderful again. And it wasn't anyone's fault, but I could just, you've just got to forgive yourself for things. We're all human.
I can't tell you the amount of times I've been in that situation where I'm trying to sleep and I'm like, shit, I've got to get up for work in 4 hours, 5 hours. Why won't I switch off? Why won't my brain let me go? Just let go. No, I you know what, you did the right. I can't profess to give you advice at all, of course, but it sounds like you did the right thing by talking to your daughter and saying, you know what, I couldn't sleep. I'll do it next week, and then you feel so much happier now.
I think my contribution to this is probably, I'm sitting here listening and thinking, well, it's actually bringing back a lot of memories for that, because the first time we met was way back in 2011, I think, when the book Goes to White Hart Lane came
That's
out.
right. That's right. Yeah.
My advice to people would be, even if you've got something that you've lived with your whole life, it's never too late to actually investigate that. And it's certainly not. And I was in my mid-40s when I started. Tara, I'll fill you in. I had a sort of traumatic incident happened very early in my life. My dad was was famous, especially amongst Spurs fans.
Is
and I
famous.
found it really, really, really hard to talk to anyone around that. And I built up a lot of anger and a lot of frustration, a lot of questions, and I still had them at 45.
Mhm.
So I had conflict with sport. I had a conflict with things. I love football, but there was so much. And doing the book, which was a long process, delved into places and asked questions I didn't particularly want to ask. But I found I had to ask, and it was doing that. And the two things that I would advise, one was subsequently, I actually went through quite a lot of therapy, quite a lot of counselling, which is for me, it was the equivalent of what you would go through as grief counselling. I'd never been in a situation to do that.
Yeah.
I would advise anybody to do that. I think it's a brilliant thing.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, as you said, Anth, there's not a service for it particularly, but actually, arguably, if you're going to spend money on yourself and you've got that money, I would advise people to do that. And the other thing, which was brilliant, I found a brilliant thing about doing the book, was that once you start talking about something, and Tara, I assume it's the same for you, and Flav, well, for all of us actually, once you start talking about something and once people realise that you are receptive, then actually it's a brilliant thing, because people start talking back to you, and people have talked to me about very deep issues that they have, and it's been fantastic.
Yeah.
Great book.
Sorry, can I ask you what the book is? What's the book? I didn't hear what.
Yeah, it's called The Ghost of White Hart Lane.
Oh, right.
It's called The Ghost of White Hart Lane.
It'll be on my reading list. Then I'll have to look for that.
I think James Moore it's still in the top 50 442 football books of all time.
Okay.
Come on, bro. Amazing.
I will definitely look out for that and get that ordered then.
Do you know what? Just as a strange anecdote, when like we said, we met back in 2011, Rob, and I obviously know your name's Rob, because John White is so entrenched in Tottenham folklore. I've more than I reckon 10 occasions in our relationship I've called you by your dad's name, and that must have been that in itself. I know you're used to it, but it must still be quite tricky.
I've had a therapist call me John as well, and that's very peculiar.
Yeah,
I changed the therapist very shortly after that.
But it's like when you've grown up with my dad would talk about your dad so much, like how good he was. My granddad watched Spurs watch the push and run side 51. My dad's first season was 61, and he loved your dad. He loved watching him play and just talked about how good he was. Cliff Jones and John White were the players that he loved. And so when I met you, knowing that your dad was who he was, it was really hard, that just to not let it slip out. And it was flippant for me, but for you, it must be tough, because it's you were so young when it happened, and it must be hard even when someone like myself has been sort of ham-fisted about it.
It's not now, because of the process of doing the book. Prior to that, it was really it was difficult. But anyway, let's move on. Enough about me.
I don't mind sharing. Just with lockdown, I think what I've noticed in myself is COVID. I've got a lot of anxiety around COVID still. I think when you work and you see the worst of it, that's all you're left with in your mind. So, seeing a lot of people struggling in hospital and then leaving and being really worried that could happen to someone that and a family member, and thinking, I'm going to come home from work and give my family COVID. That's been really hard to deal with. And we don't really have the resources. We haven't really had the time in the NHS to sort of sit down and really work on ourselves, because it's been go, 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 go. So that's been hard. And I'm hoping that now, touch wood, this is it, because it has calmed down. And I really hope it just stays like that, because it is very much, and like even going back, like people are starting going back to work, there's more people on the tube. It's been giving me social anxiety, because I'm not used to being on the tube with so many people like I was before. And now I'm thinking about, oh, how am I going to feel in like a massive 60,000 stadium with loads of people around me? How am I going to feel when I go back to that? And that's something that I've never had to deal with before. So that's going to be interesting. But it is very much about, some people aren't very self-aware about things like that of themselves. So because I know I'm going to prepare myself and I'm going to work on that. But some people may not even think that's going to be a thing, and it could hit them like a ton of bricks. So it's things like that is going to be a massive change for people when we come out of lockdown, I think.
Yeah. Do you know what, Anne? It's funny, isn't it? Nothing like that. I mean, my job's quite stressful, but I'm working from home. And one of the things I found is that, because, I mean, I've got a wife, got 3 boys, so I've got a busy life. But because I was working from home for so long, I realised, particularly when the days have been quite stressful, I couldn't switch off from work. And I'm going over there having my dinner, but I'm on my phone and I'm not switching off, and my mind's active. And like Flav was saying, I'm sitting there, 4 a.m, going, why am I not going to sleep? Probably because the wife's snoring. I'm only saying that because she's looking at me. She's going to throw a cushion at me now. Oh, I'm joking. But it's that kind of thing. And I realised really ridiculous. So I went for a walk, and like you were saying, Rachel, it's what made me sort of think about mentioning this. Went for a walk. I thought, walk. Then I think I'll start trying to run again, and do a bit of jogging, do a bit of exercise. But then I started going for a drive, and I realised that actually, as much as I thought I hated the commute to and from work, that was actually a massive part of my day where I put everything away, sorted all my shit out, if you like, on the way home and to work. And so now, actually, at about 5:30, I tend to just go for a drive. I'll just go for a drive or a walk. But it's a massive part, and it's like you were saying about being self-aware. And I'm sure there are loads of people that can relate to that. And it's not a big deal. It's not, I've not suffered. It's just really helped me. It's funny, isn't it? Particularly if my dad's had a hard day, a year or so ago. You go for a drive, you think about what you're going to say to him, that kind of thing. Then you give him a ring. It's funny. I suppose different people deal with things in different ways, but I found that really helped me, and be interested to see what we take out of lockdown as we, moving forward. So it's a strange one.
When you think about people, when we first went into the lockdown, the very first lockdown, I think for a lot of people, the adjustment of not being at work and having to work from home, that played massively on their mental health and how they were coping. And then they've adjusted, and then we've had a bit of a, toing and froing, like we're in lockdown, we're not in lockdown, now we're back in lockdown. And now they're going out of lockdown. And like you say, it's going to be such a shock going back into the workplace, or just back outside onto the commute for those who, who work in London or busier cities and what have you. It is going to play on them quite a lot. I mean, I had a bout of what I can only call social anxiety myself only last week, just out of the blue. My son asked me, he was here with his girlfriend, and said, oh, they were off to the driving range, because we've got a driving range not just outside of town. And he said, do you want to come? And I thought, oh yeah, I've always fancied having a, see if I could hit a golf ball. And I was fine in that moment, and then my mind just completely switched, and it was saying, no, I don't want to go. And he was going, come on. And I was like, no. And I don't know if it was because he was in a bit of a rush as well. I suddenly felt this pressure, and I had to go in. I needed to get changed because I'd just been in like my jogging bottoms and things. And it was suddenly like, oh my God, I need to get changed. I need to do this. I need to do that. And I just froze, and I went, no, just go without me. And he was like, no, Mum, I want you to come. And I was like, no, go without me. I don't want to go. And he went. When he left, he could see that I was upset. So he was like, well, no, I don't want to leave you. I said, no, honestly, I'm fine. You just go, and I'll go another time. But as soon as he left, I actually broke down. I did have a few tears, and I rang my friend, my Tottenham Hotspur bestie, I call her, Elaine. And, you know, she kind of said to me, you know, you need to work through this, you know, you need to work through it and get out there before it sort of sets in. So I did. I kind of sat and I thought it through, and I reframed my thoughts, which is what I tell everybody else to do this, so I've got to do it on myself. And I did, and I made myself go, and I thoroughly enjoyed it when I got there. And I was so glad that I stopped it in its tracks, because I could have not gone, and the next time it could have happened again, and it could have happened again. But it's about being kind to yourself. Like Rachel said, you've got to be kind to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Todd. No, great point. One thing we wanted to mention on this pod actually was that the Supporters Trust, we've got a new venture as well, haven't we, to raise awareness. Shall I bring you in on that, Ant, to
sure.
tell us more?
Sure. So we got an email a month or so ago from the FSA about their campaign called Terrace Talk. So they thought that essentially, because of lockdown and the fact that people haven't had an escapism through football, that we could try and, you know, do some awareness around mental health and checking in on people and you know, seeing how they're being affected without football. And actually, it really made me think that actually something as big as football could make such a big impact on something like this with mental health. And we should all be doing more, and the clubs should all be doing more. And I think the EFL have done quite a lot around it, like EFL clubs. This was originally like an EFL campaign with Mind, I think, and that was the idea from FSA, why they were like, oh, let's extend this and do #Terrace Talk. So we went to their first event, and it was amazing. They had a few people on the panel who spoke about their experiences, and we kind of went away and we just thought, how can we as an organisation do more? So that was where we started talking to a lot of other supporters trusts. That's how I got into contact with Tara. The idea from this podcast came from. We also had a meeting with the club and the foundation to discuss putting on a potential virtual event for mental health, which is in the pipeline, hopefully. So stay tuned. More information, hopefully, in the next few weeks about that. And you know, it's amazing, because when people come together and the impact such a big organisation can have, and football can have, could really make a difference. So yeah, I think it's going to be great, and hopefully we can do more things like this, which will hopefully make a change in people's lives, and maybe people listening will feel more open and feel safer and feel like they can talk and reach out and get the help they need as well. So yeah.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Anne. Look, we've been going for a long time. We make no apologies for that, because it's a really important subject, and this, I think we're in almost 90 minutes, which is great. It's hopefully it's a good listen. We've got a couple more questions, I think, and then we'll wrap it up. So over to you, Rachel. I put you on the spot there, Rachel.
No. I was just going to quickly ask Tara, as we've touched on, we're sort of coming out of this. Well, we hope we are. But you know, a lot of people at the moment are feeling anxious, and yes, we're allowed to do this, but actually, do we feel like that? What would you say, and also, you know, Flav as well, what would you suggest to people who are feeling worried and anxious at this moment as we sort of go into the next phase? What sort of advice would you give them? Tara, you start with
me first. Okay. I guess it's the biggest thing is you've already touched upon it in a way, Rachel. You've said you have to give yourself a break. You've got to understand it's been a really stressful 12 months for them. Whatever feelings they're having, not to dismiss them and not to, you know, underplay them. They're very valid to how they're feeling, and everybody's situation is unique to them. I would say, in terms of looking after their mental health as well, it's very basic stuff. You know, it's make sure you're getting your sleep, like we've all said, yeah, make sure you're getting your sleep. Don't feel you have to apologize to anybody if you're not feeling ready to step out into the world just yet. Take your time. But what I would say is, if you are having those thoughts like I was having in that situation where I felt I was having a bit of social anxiety and didn't want to go, is reframe those thoughts. Are they helping you? Because if they're not helping you and they're making you feel worse, then you need to readdress that. I'm not going to say, oh, let's all think positively and happy bunnies and all that sort of thing, because our emotions are very valid, and we can't be happy all the time, we can't be positive all the time, but recognizing them and understanding when it's becoming something starting to feel too much, and to reach out and as we've said, get that help. So yeah, it's basic stuff. Look after your sleep, look after your diet, the mindfulness, the gratitude is a great thing. Gratitude journals are really in right now, even if it's sticking a pen and piece of paper by the side of your bed. So stuff like that, really, I would say to them, and just take one day at a time.
Really, that's excellent advice. I agree. Did anyone else want to add anything in at that point? Really good.
No, I just think one of the positive things about this lockdown has been, I think there's been a lot more focus on mindfulness and conversations like this, really. But I think it's been a really good space for people, and hopefully people will equip themselves with tools that can help to deal with situations. But I think Tara's obviously right, because that's what she does. So yeah, great advice.
I would just quickly add to that, though, because obviously you're going to have people as well who will go, yeah, but I've done all of that. I've done all of that. Now I feel like I've got nothing. They need structure. Mm-hmm. So I would say start to integrate the structure back into your life now. Set your alarm clock in the morning for a certain time. If you're used to being up at 6, all right, and you still don't have to be up at 6, well, to get back into the habit of getting up earlier, maybe set it for 7 or 8. Start to bring it back down and bring the structure and the routine back into your life, so that it doesn't feel like you've gone from doing nothing to first day back at work and it's just too much to cope with. Start to build up to it is another thing I'd say. I could go on forever, sure.
Yeah. That's really good, and it's the going to bed at a sensible time as well, isn't it? Because I think a lot of us sort of, it creeps later and later.
Shut off the social media an hour before bed. I tell the kids, so I'll tell you too.
Yeah.
And last one for you, Flav, I think is. So basically, you've done obviously some really good work over the years for mental health through the Fighting Cock. You've got a fantastic demographic for the audience. Have you got anything in the pipeline new that's coming up with the Fighting Cock in this area or not?
I mean, right now we're concentrating on what it might be like to get back to normality and watch football, and all the reason why we're all around our respective computers via the internet and talking about these really important issues is because fundamentally we all love football and we all love Tottenham, and so right now we're focusing on putting together bits of content that make people feel good and feel excited about going back and watching our team play. So we've got a couple of things in the pipeline, podcasts, videos that trying to tap into how people are feeling and what they want and what they expect when we go back to watching Tottenham Hotspur play at White Hart Lane. And just to get back to 60,000 people. I know football doesn't fix or solve mental health problems, but it does give people respite from the stuff that they're struggling with. It's giving me respite, all of us, it sounds like respite from the stuff we're struggling with. And to get back to normality in inverted commas and have 62,000 or whatever it is that gets into our new stadium together, and for people across the seas in the US and elsewhere who can watch football as it's supposed to be seen, with fans. So we're just trying to create a buzz around that and make people be excited about going back to watch Spurs and hopefully, you know, like I said, like contribute to the respite that people might need. And that's what the podcast is all about. Like it's not, you know, I don't know anything. I know zero about tactics and about whether Jose Mourinho should be our manager or not, whether Daniel Levy's doing a good job. I've got my ideas, but I don't know if they're true. But what we do on the podcast is just talk bollocks for 1 hour a week, and hopefully people it resonates with people. And I think sometimes it's okay not to just say, "Are you suffering? Do you have mental health problems? Are you depressed?" Sometimes it's just enough to give them something to listen to, which is a moment away from all the shit that they have to think about and deal with. I know that would help me if I was still going through it.
Yeah, thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you. We'll wrap it up there, guys. That's. I think we've actually. This is. I think we're at 1 hour 35, so we're at the length of a football match. So there you go. And I'd imagine this was
it's more exciting than Jose Mourinho's football matches, isn't it?
the words right out my mouth, Flav.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. That's brilliant. Thank you. Obviously, thank you, Rachel, Anth, and Rob, for your time as always. Flav, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast.
Pleasure,
really
absolute pleasure.
It's been a joy to have you here. And Tara, thank you as well. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you join us. And thanks also on behalf of anyone that's used Sport Against Suicide to you, Tara, for setting that up and for making such a massive contribution, I'm sure, to people's lives. So thank you. We will include links to websites, to support lines, to all kinds of different information below this video on our website. So we'll make sure if anybody's out there that does need any help or support, there will be support lines below here. So please do scroll down and take a look. Thank you as always to you, the listener or the watcher, for tuning in. As we always say, we're on Spotify, iTunes and YouTube. You can watch or listen to any of our shows subscription free by visiting our website, THSTOfficial.com. There, you know what I'm going to say, you can become a Spurs Supporters Trust member. So please come and join us. You know you want to. And we'd love to have you on board. But look, again, guys, thank you so much. We hope everyone listening to this or watching it enjoyed it, and we'll be back soon. Thanks again, and come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you
Come on, you
Spurs.
Spurs.